My mother-in-law criticized my employment status and educational background, and the tension came to a head when she unexpectedly doused me with hot water. This shocking act was completely unwarranted, and while I thankfully escaped injury, the potential for serious harm was undeniable. I was taken aback by her extreme actions, especially since it was my husband who was unemployed, not me. The growing resentment toward her unreasonable behavior became overwhelming. Enough is enough, I resolved. If this is what you want, I have no choice but to leave, I declared firmly. My mother-in-law seemed almost pleased by my decision to leave, showing no remorse. Unable to tolerate such a toxic atmosphere any longer, I decided to return to my parents' home. Unbeknownst to her, I had been the main financial supporter of our household, having taken up stock trading and earning approximately $45,000 a month after leaving my job. Despite being ousted, I was confident in my ability to sustain myself independently. My relationship with my husband, Stephen, began in college, where we both studied economics and aspired to careers in finance. After securing jobs at different brokerage firms, Stephen eventually proposed, and I eagerly accepted, looking forward to a joyful future together. However, our plans took an unexpected turn when Stephen asked me to quit my job and live with him at his mother's home to avoid leaving her alone after his father's passing. Despite my initial reluctance, I agreed, hoping it wouldn't be a burden. Yet, given the recent events, I felt a deep sense of regret and determined never to assist my mother-in-law again, even as she faced financial difficulties. When Stephen was in middle school, he became the sole companion to his mother after his father's passing. As an only child, he was deeply concerned about her well-being, which I understood and respected. Consequently, I agreed to live with them, and 3 weeks later, we moved into Stephen's family home. Initially, my mother-in-law seemed happy to have her son back home, but her demeanor changed drastically when she turned to me. Her cold, unwelcoming gaze made it abundantly clear that she did not approve of me. Despite feeling unwelcome, I tried to stay positive, brushing off a faint muttering from her that I couldn't quite catch. Maybe it was about me, maybe not. I chose to let it go. However, living with her soon proved to be more challenging than I anticipated. One morning, I was jolted awake by her loud voice demanding that I get up and make breakfast. It was only 5:00 a.m., her reasoning. "Don't just lay around because you're not working," she scolded sharply. Although it felt ridiculous that early, I didn't argue and started preparing the meal, all while enduring her constant critiques about my speed and efficiency. Breakfast was ready after what felt like an eternity, but it was only 25 minutes. I apologized for the delay, only to be met with more complaints about the time it took. Her next grievance was about the soup being too salty, which I honestly didn't think it was. But according to her, my cooking was a plot against her health. "What are you saying? There's something wrong with my taste? Are you trying to kill me quickly by feeding me such salty meals?" she accused. Stunned by her harsh words, I found myself questioning her motives with a mix of curiosity and concern. I finally asked, "Why are you so harsh on me?" "What are you talking about? I don't think I'm being harsh. Are you trying to make me the bad guy?" "That's not what I meant," I replied, but I was too overwhelmed by my mother-in-law's constant pressure to argue back. "Finish eating and start cleaning. After that, there's laundry to do, so there's no time to rest," she commanded. From that point on, every day became a relentless barrage of criticisms and tasks that wore me down mentally and physically. As I cleaned, she would point out, "You missed the dust in the corner." While doing laundry, she would complain, "There's still a stain." About a month into living with her, I felt like I was nearing my breaking point, so I decided to talk to Stephen about it. "It's about your mother," I began hesitantly. "She's been very critical every day, and it's becoming difficult for me. Could you please ask her to ease up?" Stephen's response, however, was non-existent, which momentarily irritated me. But then I noticed he looked unusually pale, as if burdened with something significant. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I asked. After a pause, Stephen hesitantly revealed, "Actually, I've been fired from the company." I was stunned, unable to process his words immediately. What? Is this some kind of joke? It wasn't. Stephen explained that due to an economic downturn, the company had to downsize, and he was laid off. "So you'll be unemployed from tomorrow?" I asked. "Well, I can work for one more month after receiving the notice of dismissal, but after that?" Fortunately, I have been using my knowledge from my time at the securities company to trade stocks. Although it was challenging at first, I was now earning about $45,000 a month, so we weren't struggling financially. I comforted Stephen and temporarily forgot all about the harassment from my mother-in-law. From the next day onward, I continued to endure her harsh treatment as Stephen lost his job. Feeling the need to be strong and support him, I persisted through the difficult situation. A month passed, and Stephen officially became unemployed. Initially, he started looking for a job, but gradually he began to spend most of his time at home, making excuses. "Shouldn't you start looking for a job more seriously?" I suggested, hoping to motivate him to find a new path forward. "I'm looking, but it's tough to find a good company that fits me," Stephen responded, his voice lacking any real urgency or intent to find new work soon. Reluctantly, I continued to be the main provider for us. As time went on, my mother-in-law's harshness only got worse, and I found myself feeling more drained with each passing day. Initially, I thought I needed to put up with it because Stephen was out of work, but over time, that reasoning no longer seemed justifiable. My days became a blur of listlessness. One morning, in a rare occurrence, Stephen left the house early, possibly to finally start a serious job hunt. After he left, I began my usual chores. "Make sure it's clean. Do it properly," my mother-in-law nagged from her spot on the living room sofa, sipping her coffee and throwing sarcastic comments my way. Fed up, I chose to ignore her. Suddenly, she lost her temper and shouted, "How dare you ignore me? You're just a mere daughter-in-law, and you don't even have a job." I continued my cleaning, trying to block out her harsh words. Her anger escalated, and she confronted me again, yelling, still ignoring me. "Unemployed and uneducated people like you should leave this house." In her rage, she then splashed the hot water she had prepared for her coffee on me. "It's hot. Please stop." I screamed out of reflex, shocked by her sudden aggressive act. Thankfully, the water wasn't boiling, so I avoided serious burns, but the situation could have been disastrous. Finally reacting, she said venomously, "This is what I've been saying. If you're not working, leave this house." Her smirk was cold and unfeeling. Exhausted by her relentless hostility, I felt I had no option but to comply with her demand. "All right, I'll leave." "Good, that makes things easier. Leave quickly," she snapped. I quickly packed my belongings and decided to leave that very day, unwilling to endure another moment in such a toxic environment. I headed straight to my parents' home. Upon my arrival, my parents were surprised by my sudden visit, but welcomed me warmly. I waited for a call from Stephen, but it never came. No calls, no messages. Feeling isolated, I resolved not to reach out until he did. A month passed since I returned to my parents' house, but still no word from Stephen. My affection for him gradually diminished, and I began to consider divorce. Then, one early morning, the doorbell rang at my parents' house. When I glanced at the monitor, to my surprise, both Stephen and my mother-in-law were standing outside. "What now?" I muttered to myself, baffled by their appearance after all this time. "Yes, what can I do for you?" I asked through the intercom. "I've forgiven you. Now come back home quickly," my mother-in-law shouted through the intercom, her voice harsh as usual. "Forgiven me? What are you talking about?" I was perplexed. I hadn't done anything that required forgiveness from her. After expressing my confusion, I ended the intercom call, boiling with frustration at her presumptuous attitude. However, they didn't leave. Instead, they started banging on the front door violently. Don't just hang up on me. Come on, let's go back, my mother-in-law yelled, her voice echoing with urgency and irritation. Concerned that their loud presence might disturb the neighborhood, I reluctantly opened the door and invited them inside. After seating them on the living room sofa, I asked about the reason for their sudden and unexpected visit. It was especially strange considering it had been my mother-in-law who had insisted I leave, and now here she was, asking me to return. The whole situation was bewildering. "You're the one who told me to leave. There's no way I can go back now," I asserted firmly. Responding with visible frustration, my mother-in-law accused me of being childish and claimed she had forgiven me, insisting that I return and stay at her house. She even went so far as to say she'd let an unemployed and uneducated person like me stay there. "But I'm not the unemployed one, it's Steven, and if I go back, you'll just take advantage of me every day. I might not be working, but what about your son, huh?" I retorted, hoping to shed some light on the situation. Steven seemed taken aback by this revelation. My mother-in-law looked confused, indicating that Steven hadn't informed her about his job loss. Pressed further, Steven finally admitted to being laid off from the company. Apologies and explanations followed, with Steven trying to justify his silence by relying on my income for financial stability. My mother-in-law, shocked by the news, openly expressed her anger towards Steven for not finding a job yet. "Why did you keep quiet about this? What are we going to do now?" she scolded him. Steven assured her that my income would suffice for the time being, which only caused my mother-in-law to label him as worthless for not actively seeking employment. Fed up with Steven's excuses and the entire ordeal, I couldn't believe that they expected me to just return and pretend as if nothing had happened. When my mother-in-law suggested I come back, I flatly refused, considering all the mistreatment I had endured. Their unexpected visit quickly escalated into a heated argument, especially when the truth came out about my mother-in-law's shocking act of pouring hot water on me. Steven was horrified to learn about this incident and confronted his mother. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. She confessed, attributing her actions to my ignoring her. This revelation ignited a fiery exchange between Steven and his mother, forcing me to step in and suggest they take their dispute back to their own home. My intervention, highlighting the discomfort their loud arguing caused in someone else's home, seemed to shift their attitudes. Previously assertive and domineering, they now turned to pleading, begging me to return and promising no further harm. However, I saw right through their assurances. Steven's promise to find a job lacked sincerity, and my mother-in-law's vow to avoid causing trouble seemed equally unreliable. I expressed my doubts aloud, making it clear I found their promises empty and that they would likely just take advantage of me again. Their silence following my statement only confirmed my suspicions. Leaving them in the living room, I retreated to my room to gather my thoughts. When I returned 10 minutes later, I found them still seated in silence, heads bowed, seemingly reflecting on the situation. Frustrated by their quietude, I broke the silence. "How long do you plan to stay quiet? It doesn't matter to me anymore." Instead of verbal responses, what followed was a definitive action on my part. I handed Steven a document I had prepared in advance, a pre-filled divorce form with my name signed on it. Steven looked at the document, utterly confused and taken aback. I explained bluntly, "Can't you see? It's a divorce form. I'm done with someone who won't find a job and didn't even contact me after I went back to my parents' house." "Don't wait. Please, this is too sudden," Steven protested, his stubbornness irritating me further as he seemed oblivious to how his actions were the root cause of our marital problems. Unmoved by his pleas, I stood firm in my decision, ready to move on from the turmoil and start anew, free from the dysfunction that had overshadowed my life for too long. I had made up my mind. My decision to divorce Steven was final, and nothing he could say would change that. Steven, still in shock, questioned if the divorce was too harsh. I responded firmly, "I don't think so. It's your fault." I directed that same sternness toward my mother-in-law, who was also to blame for the situation. Resigned, Stephen signed the divorce papers, cautioning me not to regret my decision. However, I felt a profound sense of relief, confident that the one who would regret this was not me, but Stephen. "I'll submit the divorce papers. I don't want any compensation. Just go home," I declared, finalizing my separation from Stephen. Although it might have seemed harsh, distancing myself was necessary to escape the continuous harassment from my mother-in-law and the strain of Stephen's unemployment. 3 weeks later, while enjoying a quiet day at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law. She informed me that the electricity and gas had been cut off at her house and insinuated that I might have had something to do with it. I explained that since the divorce, I had ceased covering Stephen's and her living expenses. Desperate for help, she asked if I could pay just for that month. I found the request absurd, given that we were no longer related, and I no longer lived there. I firmly declined, suggesting she ask Stephen for assistance since he had promised to find a job. Unable to accept my refusal, she pleaded for help, playing the ex-wife's card. However, I remained resolute, ending the call and blocking her number to avoid further entanglements. Finally, I had severed ties with both my ex-mother-in-law, who had persistently harassed me, and Stephen, who had proven himself unreliable. Life at my parents' house gradually became peaceful, a stark contrast to the tumultuous times I had left behind. I began to enjoy a newfound sense of tranquility and freedom, relieved to have distanced myself from such a toxic environment. Several months after distancing myself from a turbulent chapter of my life, I found myself on a holiday, checking stock charts and enjoying the peace of my new routine. It was then that I received an unexpected message from Stephen. In it, he apologized for everything, acknowledging his past reliance on me and mentioning his recent employment at a factory. Despite his apology, I felt no desire to re-engage with that part of my life. Stephen wrote about his mother's continued harsh behavior and expressed a wish for me to come back, but reading his message, I was convinced that reconciliation was off the table. I decided to block Stephen's number, choosing to permanently close that door. 8 months post-divorce, life took a more positive turn when a friend introduced me to a new man. He was dependable and treated me with respect, and despite our age difference, we found a strong connection. While we weren't rushing towards marriage, I cherished the happy moments we shared. He brought a sense of joy and stability that I had long missed, allowing me to focus on the present and leave my troubled past behind. With him, I began to truly rebuild my life.